what areas are maybe not as important? What is the kind of focus of certain sections on the written exam? Which subjects have like a very big jump from the knowledge you need at the CC level to the AC level? What's up, Beer Geeks? Welcome back to another episode of the AC FAQ with the Beer Scholar crew and Will D, our certified Cicerone who's about to take the AC exam in 3 months. We got Advanced Cicerones, Scott Fielder and Chris Crow here, and myself. We're answering FAQ type questions, the kind of questions that we get from people all the time emailing to say like, hey, what's up with the AC? There's not that much information out there. I'm curious about X, Y, and Z. And so we just figured, let's get that information out there. Let's demystify the exam. We answered a couple other questions about what game day looks like on the exam. We answered a question about what resources to study. We've talked about quantitative data. Do you need to memorize it for all the beer styles? We also talked about what depth of knowledge do you need and how detailed should you be in your essays. So if those sound like topics you'd be interested in hearing about, if you signed up for the AC or thinking about doing the AC, you should definitely watch all those videos. And this one, we're going to talk about what is the kind of focus of certain sections on the written exam. What areas are maybe not as important? Which subjects have like a very big jump from the knowledge you need at the CC level to the AC level. You know, some of this stuff might kind of tie in with some of the things we've discussed in answering other FAQs, but I think it's worth going over this and hitting each of these questions in detail because surely more information will come out. So Will's question was, keeping and serving beer and beer ingredients and the brewing process are both worth 20% on the written exam. Do these sections focus on certain topics? And also, you know, we had discussed in a previous video that like water, for instance, was not that important of a subject. And so are there other subjects that are, you know, maybe not so important that you can, you know, not focus on them quite as much? And then also, you know, what subjects have this big leap of knowledge requirement from the CC to the AC? So I guess I'll just start by reiterating really from previous videos that the DBQM, the Draft Beer Quality Manual, and the book Cellarmanship, those are like your keeping and serving Bibles for that section. You're going to want to know those backwards and forwards for sure. You know, finding more detailed info on certain like draft equipment can be really like challenging, and you will have to like label a draft system device on the exam. We already told you in a previous video that you're not going to have to actually balance a draft system on the exam. Thank God. That's more like master level kind of stuff, but you should understand how they work. And then you asked about brewing ingredients and the brewing process, which, you know, looms quite large. We talked about, you know, reading basically as much on those topics as you can, especially How to Brew by John Palmer, kind of the Bible of that section. You know, my feeling was that you should understand the ingredients and techniques used to make not just beer in general, but even individual beer styles. Things to understand very well would include like lagering, hop chemistry, basic chemistry of like various stages of fermentation, of the mash, and water chemistry, we mentioned, is one of the most complex parts of brewing and of beer making in general, and so thankfully is not tested too harshly on the AC. What do you guys want to add to all that? What do you think, Scott?
I think the big key to Will's question is that the brewing process and the keeping and serving, there's no other place where you're going to be able to earn points on that except for the written. So that's why those are so important to study for when you're taking the written, because for the beer and food pairing stuff, 5% of that is going to be your oral exam. Obviously for, you know, beer flavor, you've got the whole tasting exam, so it's even less than that, I think. And then obviously for the styles that will be tested on that in an oral exam as well. So, you know, that's why those two are particularly important to prepare for on the written exam, because there's nowhere else to make up, you know, anything that you've lost in any other areas of the entire exam. So I think that's a big thing to kind of point out in all of this. Mm-hmm. Chris, you got anything else to add?
Take that kind of scientific approach to understanding not just the material, but actually how the exam works. I think that's really key to walking in with confidence and knowing what to expect, I think that can really inform your studying is really understanding what you're going to be seeing on the test, like Scott's talking about, really breaking it down.
Yeah, and the Cicerone website has the percentage breakdown of what each section is worth. I like Scott's approach, obviously, trying to get the points on the written that you can't make up on the tasting or the oral, but those are also sections of the exam that are worth more as a total percentage of the final grade too. Food and beer pairing, for example, has some crossover obviously between, you have an oral exam about food and beer, you got a lot of the written exam about food and beer, but what is it, like 15% total of the exam? You can't just blow off 15% of the exam, but there are sections of the exam that are closer to 20% of your total, and the only points for those are on the written.
Right.
So that's a good kind of like middle of a Venn diagram to focus on, really, really doing well on the written.
The next part of this question was, what subjects have like a big leap from the CC to the AC? Scott, what were you thinking on that?
I think the first thing to kind of note is that there's obviously a leap in knowledge for every single, thing you're going to see on there, but there are some where maybe you wouldn't even have seen one question about it, on level 2, and then all of a sudden you might even get asked to write about it, in an essay for level 3. And I think for us, it's, the big one is cask. You could not only get multiple choice questions on it, you can get an essay question about it. That's a pretty big leap. Food, the same thing. There's kind of that like kind of short answer, food, question that sometimes comes up on level 2, and usually on level 3 you're going to get something in multiple choice. You could get some form of that in an essay too. And another thing with the essays is like they do a really good job of kind of taking all of the sections and they kind of sprinkle in little bits between in one question. You could get a question that's maybe about a process question, but then they might ask you to name some beer styles or something. So when we're kind of going through this, and whenever we mention essays, they're not just like totally honed in on just one thing all the time, just as something for everybody to kind of take note of. But I think the big thing, right? And so I think the big ones, definitely are cask and food. I think you have to go a lot deeper for, especially if you want to do well on the off flavor portion. You have to know lots of the different, chemical pathways for the off flavors, where they come from, how they get cleaned up, if they're acceptable in a beer style. You got to know what styles they're acceptable in. There's a lot more that you need to know, and I would say that's a pretty big jump.
Yeah, what are you thinking, Crow?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I think, like, just objectively speaking, with the amount of content that real ale, cask, cellarmanship, and then, food, like Scott said, are just leaps and bounds above anything that you would see on the certified level. I would say, too, that, this is another spot in your studies where you should think a little bit critically about what your strengths and weaknesses are too. I know for me, going into it, some of the most difficult things to digest on any of the levels were some of the brewing science stuff, and so the brewing process stuff. And so even though I don't think that that's as much of a leap as cask and food pairing came a little bit more naturally to me. So just make sure that you take an honest evaluation of maybe what you overstudied for on level 2, understudied for, and try to regroup a little bit, because that's the big cautionary tale, is it's all quite a bit deeper. But yeah, cask and food, I think, is like 1A and 1B for sure.
Oh, I was going to say another thing. I think we maybe have mentioned it in a previous video, but I think it's worth repeating, is that the other big leap is just the way that you have to communicate, especially on the essay questions, the descriptors that you have to use, specific commercial examples. If they're asking you to talk about food, just using the term multi-sweet or something like that, maybe the beer is going to add to the food when you use it to cook. That's, that is definitely a step higher, and you've got to be really specific. And it's kind of hard because even in all of the material, not a ton of them really take that approach, maybe besides Brewmaster's Table, because that's Garrett Oliver's wheelhouse, kind of taking that to the next level. But in all of the other places, they don't, even the BJCP, they don't go super duper deep in terms of descriptors and things like that.
I wrote that down too. Your descriptive abilities need to be way beyond what they were in CC. They need to be way beyond what the BJCP descriptors are. You can't be using things like citrusy, bready, and caramel and stuff like that. I mean, you can use those words, but they need to be like nested in something evocative. yeah, all that cooking and food stuff, that's like all pretty new. Make sure you read a book about cooking and everything. If that kind of stuff, if you're not experienced with cooking, learn what all those ingredients are in the appendix and all those cooking techniques, all those dishes. That's all new stuff, right? There's also the new syllabus that just came out 5.0. It has some stuff on it about check side pool faucets, which I doubt will show up in a big way, but I don't know, just figured I'd mention it. I mean, I don't know where they're going to go with that yet, right? That's new on the syllabus. That could be something they dive into, potentially.
Yeah, you just got to kind of imagine, okay, let's say you get a question that's maybe about troubleshooting, and they are talking about, maybe a beer tastes like, maybe it's been infected, or maybe it's, got a little diacetyl or acetic acid in it. You can't just say, oh, well, maybe the person who, the beer tender just was, dipping the faucet of beer, because then you might have to take it another step and say, or if they're using a side pull faucet, they're not cleaning it, right afterwards, where that would be the exception where you could, do that. So there's, in small little places, there could be some extra points to be had.
That's a good point, yeah. You don't want to spend a bunch of time on those like tangents, but just mentioning them in a quick sentence and moving on. Don't go off into tangent land. That's how you lose points. And the other thing I wanted to add to all that is, obviously with the beer styles, right? There's far more styles that you have to learn on the AC syllabus. You're not going to be asked about American IPA, right? I mean, maybe you will be, but you're not going to go into your oral style exam and get asked about like a real obvious one that you will know for sure, right? You're going to be asked about something weird. That's my experience and people I've talked to. So be prepared to answer questions about any of the 80 or 90 styles on the syllabus.
Like Lichtenheiner or some weird ass shit like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And we kind of use some deduction there too, right? Like knowing that when you go into your beer style oral exam, they're going to give you a sample of beer and say and they're going to say, is this, a Belgian double or not? Is this a good example of it? If you can't find Bier de Garde in the United States, maybe you don't spend all your time studying, Bier de Garde for your, potentially for your oral exam. There are places where you can, like you said, you can kind of just think logically and you can say, okay, I'll know that, because you can always get something for an essay or for a multiple choice question. But, especially now that you're taking things separately, you can kind of, once you're studying for the tasting exam, then you can maybe kind of put some of those to the side and maybe only reference them every so often. Be
familiar with weird stuff like tropical stout and Weizenbock and, things that they can get if they go to, a store with a huge bottle selection, because they will pull those things out on you. And I guess, let's see, was there anything else in that question we wanted to talk about? Are there any areas that aren't so important? We mentioned water. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would say you don't need to go super deep on. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
The only small thing is kind of a strategy thing, which is I would not advise that you don't go super deep on basically anything. Because, it's like you paid a bunch of money to take this exam. It's going to be tough no matter what. Make sure you have all your bases covered, but don't bank on being able to make up a bunch of points in the tasting or oral exams. So, the written exam is worth 75% of your total grade. And so it's very, very difficult to bump your grade up if you get not the grade you're looking for on the written exam with the other stuff that's only worth 15 and 10% of the exam. So
to put that into context, we've, heard of someone who got a 79 on their written and then got an 89 on their tasting, and they sounded like they didn't do too well on orals, but maybe just did, maybe like a C, maybe 70, 75, and they only bumped up their written score by 1 point, and that was the reason they passed, was because they did so well. And three of the 5 people in our group have taken the tasting exam, and none of us have gotten an 89. That is not an easy feat, and you don't want to put yourself in that position.
That's not something to count on. Just go in prepared for every aspect of the test. Yeah, sadly, there's not a whole lot of things that we can say, like, don't worry about this or that. Prepare for it like you feel like you are preparing for the master exam. Because even if you do that, you'll find out later, even if you pass the AC, you wouldn't have been prepared for the MC anyway, but you did get yourself to the AC level. I mean, that's my takeaway from how I prepped. I did it like I thought I was going for the MC and then passed the AC.
Yeah,
and it all worked out.
And try to get a respectable score in every section. Kind of study that way. We're talking a lot about how we're trying to demystify the exam, which is funny to me because it's all like urban legends and mystical by narrative, right? Because it's like Cicerone's pretty upfront about it. It's like they've got the syllabus. If you know a handful of things about everything on the syllabus to a reasonable depth, you're like in a really good spot, and they're not going to bust something out that's like that you have no idea was coming if you're really good about following the syllabus. So, just don't leave anything behind on that syllabus.
All right. Good advice there. I think we're good on this one. I have a flu and Scott had surgery, as you can tell, just the other day. So we're trying to keep these ones a little tight. So I think we're good. Everyone good on that? Everyone satisfied? Oh, looks like we lost everybody. I don't know what's going on. Maybe my internet's fucked up. Anyway, we're calling it. All right. See you in the next episode.
Later, everyone.